You are now in the Reality Capture Network.
Welcome to the Reality Capture Network. Today we are excited to be talking with Joel from Clark Construction as well as Brent from FARO. So thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it as always.
All right. I know we're going to dive into some fun discussions here, talking about reality capture within the construction space, some focus in concrete. But before we really dig in, let's do some introductions. So, Brent, let's start with you. I know we've had you on before. Great to have you again, as well as Joel. So we'll start with you, Brent, and then we can pass over to Joel.
Yep. Thanks, Matt. So, Brent Slawnikowski. I'm a senior account manager with FARO Technologies in our AC space in the Chicagoland region, and looking forward to talking with you guys today.
I'm Joel Frank. I'm a senior VDC manager for Clark Construction. I head up all the northern region, from Chicagoland to Nashville area to Denver.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you both. So, I think what we could start with is, Joel, let's talk a little bit about your guys' firm and your current focus. I know we talk a lot about different technologies within this space, from the scanners and handheld units and, the then process of what to do with that data. Would you give us a little bit of an overview of, kind of where you guys are currently at within the technologies and what you're applying in your firm?
Yeah, so definitely. For us, we probably started in the northern region, probably started with a lot of the laser scanning in-house about 2 to 3 years ago. With that, we've got an RTC, FARO, and some P-series scanners. But preferably we use the FARO out in our Chicagoland region. With that, we kind of use this for pre-pours a lot. And what's really kind of awkward about us here out in the north is that we don't self-perform concrete out in our mid-Atlantic region. So we really have to make sure that our concrete subcontractors are going to spec and to the code, or to our code and to the concrete spec, as well as the flatness and levelness. We really don't scan after pours or this, but we try to scan if we see that the concrete is misshaped or going through, where we have it with when we have a flooring contractor that needs to put something down after the concrete and we see what's going on afterwards. Or we use it for a lot of capture that we've done at Willis Tower, that renovation work that we go into trying to put this into meshes for coordination for MEP.
Okay, awesome. And so you've been doing that internally for 2 to 3 years now. Prior to that, were you using external, or were you using a whole different process?
We were using external, most likely.
Okay.
With everything. We would subcontract a lot of it out. I think that we weren't really smart enough to do it in-house. We've kind of got ourselves trained up a little bit and kind of hired a group that kind of trained us up a little bit to get that knowledge.
Awesome. What's one of the difficulties you see in the processes that you're using it still? I know, like you're talking about, it's only been a couple years you've brought it internally, and we see, there's a lot to learn, right? It's a big learning curve. A lot of people, you gotta look at the hardware you need, the computer side, the softwares, the processes. What's the current difficulties you've seen?
I would say trying to get it on control, because we don't have surveyors on board. That's the hardest part. I would say I had a lot of calls with Brent saying, "Hey, you need targets here." Like, what are you doing here?
Yeah,
you're doing this. This is a no-no kind of thing. It was a lot of calls with Brent to get me in line. Hey, you need to have the scanner.
I remember 101 North Wacker very well. Trying to window in on some black and whites from the bridge. It's the new building that's right on the water. Beautiful building that they put up. And I think it's interesting, Joel. What I'm curious is, some GCs are self-perform some aren't, and they sub it out, right? But not all of them are, some self-performs don't do their own scanning. They do more traditional methods. And then, some of the GCs who don't self-perform, they'll sub out the scanning, or they'll sub out the dipstick or total station work to be done. What kind of things do you guys hold? If you guys are doing your own scanning and you have a self-perform concrete contractor come out, are you holding them to do their own scanning? Are you relying on their reports coming from various technologies, or do you guys spec certain things out? I find that interesting to see how different contractors work together on that.
For us right now, since I'm kind of one of the only ones and I have a few engineers, we don't have the time or space to get that scanning there, so we kind of reliant on the concrete contractor.
Okay.
Which I really wish we had more time to do that, so we have time to get that where we can get the floor flatness before the scan before that, and then after 30 days to see how it kind of reacts, especially with PT decks.
Yeah.
When we tie that together, that's really important with all our PT decks that we do. That's one of our big jobs. But it's something that I would like to do, and it's, and like in Chicago, it's going so fast after the pour. That's one thing with the technology we need to, where I feel like we need to, have something more of a wheel or more mobile scan to walk around the site after the flight, because right now if you try to do 3 to 4 minutes or 2 minutes per scan, you're basically getting some areas, but some areas already covered ready to get on to the next floor. I've
heard typical pour cycles on a fast side might be as quick as 3 days, or maybe it's even better than that. Is that typically what you guys are seeing?
3 to 4 days. Right now we're almost every other day, and we're just putting up another 51-story building right by Union Station, downtown Chicago, and it's every other day on both sides of the slabs right now.
Okay. And you mentioned mobile, and obviously there's a lot of different mobile solutions out there today, but people have always strayed from them because, the accuracies aren't quite there within the scope of a floor flatness survey per se. But maybe if I'm doing progress scanning or site observations, I could fly a DGI, or I can use a low grade Velodyne system. Do you see, as these mobile systems get better, that being sort of the demand for that? Right now a deck might take, let's say, an hour to an hour and a half on a typical vertical deck. If you could get it down to, say, 10 minutes to scan it, would that make that difference for you guys?
Oh yeah, definitely, because right now it's 3 to 4 hours to be out there to scan, and if you do it 10 minutes, that would be perfect. And then another thing I like is the pre-pour scanning, or you could use a drone to do. I've seen that as well on a lot of drones that you do the pre-pour, see where everything is. But I like the scanning where you can see that, where you almost can do it like an as-built in slab with all the conduits.
Yep.
If you have the right, and it looks really nice to have an as-built location of those conduits before the pour.
Yeah.
So that you don't get to drill. And that's the give or take, where you're having a personnel be out there for every pour 3 to 4 hours for those slabs, instead of trying to outsource it to that location.
Sounds like a job for Spot, perhaps, right?
Exactly.
So, one of the interesting things that I find, actually with any customer, it's always interesting what deliverable they need, right? Whether we're going out for as-builts or we're doing services for a client that needs, an as-built of above ceiling or whatever the case is, it always varies in concrete construction, right? One client might, scan and then produce a heat map, and then they're done, or they hand that off to make their improvements. Others will use, extraction of points on a grid so they know what the elevations are. And I've always found it intriguing how the contractors differ in how they do their concrete correction. So if your scope says this, and you need to fix these areas, I'm curious, I've seen in different ways, how are you guys doing that? So if you go out and scan, and you find an issue in the floor, how do you report that to the contractor that's doing it, or do they provide that information to you as part of the scope?
I basically I figure out what the scope is to see what range they need to be, and then I have like a pass or fail in green and red, or I do a heat map to show how the variations. I prefer the heat map because it kind of tells a story of where the water and that's going to drain. But a lot of people like the pass and fail because then you know what's out of spec and what's in spec. So I kind of give them two different drawings.
Right.
And the way I like that is because the program I like the best is Build It, because Build It, you can get a colorized point cloud through that, and then you can put that into a drawing platform that actually comes out really nice.
Yeah.
With a ground.
Okay.
Which I'm not.
And then basically from there, it's up to them to make that correction, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Because one of the things I've always thought about, from there, you can take that information, if it's tied back to survey control or CAD, you can potentially lay out those locations. Now I know a majority of users don't do this. It's kind of like, hey, the high spot's over there, the low spot's here, let's roughly fix it. But are we that goes back to, okay, we're spending all this time to generate this quality control workflow and provide these results, and then we sort of half shoot it out, right, or half-ass it out, and it is what it is. And I think that's another area where us as vendors can look to address that, right? We can speed up the workflow to capture. We speed up the workflow to delivery of that heat map, that grid on points, or whatever the case is. And then with that, we also speed up the delivery of the corrections, right? Because we're going to continue to crunch that time down as we can cure concrete faster, and our technology gets more efficient. Our delivery will have to get faster as well, right? So.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
But that's all good, very good insight. I really appreciate that, Joel.
No worries.
Yeah, it's interesting at times when you're trying to balance that that speed of a project, like, hey, the project's moving forward, here's the schedule, and then you see these technologies, and it's like, it's so useful to go implement, but if you can't do it fast enough, we're just going to go on without it.
Right, right.
Exactly.
And trying to see that balance of like, where's the payoff, where's the ROI, at what point do some of these technologies, is it worth the project, maybe even adjusting a little bit to the technology time frame and delivery? Is it valuable enough, or are we just stuck on this delivery date?
Right, right.
Exactly.
It's a moving target, and it always needs to be faster. I need it now, right? Now, do you guys, you mentioned pre-pour scanning, and I always have encouraged that with anybody scanning concrete, because it has a huge potential to save a lot of time and money and effort. How often are you guys doing that, and are you trying to do that on more projects?
I do that in all projects in the north, in Chicago.
Okay.
Anything that's PT cable, I have an engineer that goes out there and does it, because we've seen it so much value because of no more scanning for rebar. We already know where that is. We already know where the green cables are. We know where the PT, or we know where the light conduits, or the contractor missed something,
right,
or something in that area, and it's so much easier to find. It's been very powerful.
Are you guys using this? So a lot of people like to validate things that are there, right? Is all the rebar in place? Are the floor penetrations in there? Are you guys using the scan data to validate that? Do you do it visually? What's your typical workflow of that?
So I do it both.
Okay.
I actually export the 360 panoramics out of my scans, and I put it into a program where I have point clouds and the panoramics in the same location at that location where I scanned, so I can see them both. If they can't really like the pixelated points, they can go right into that 360 camera to see that location.
Okay. So are you guys making any strides towards more like visual verification type stuff? Like some companies are starting to explore HoloLens. We've touted the idea of using the laser projector to project some things, right?
We were looking into Reconstruct, which is
Okay.
another kind of good platform where I like it because of we're looking into that where you can use a 360 camera like an Insta 360 and it almost give you that LiDAR and you can roam around it and it gives you that kind of not really depth with points, but it gives you enough points to give you pictures and some data that you can measure off of to see where those are.
Okay. That's cool. That's an interesting workflow. I haven't ran into that one yet. I see Matt, I see this big push with AR now that we have, the HoloLens has been out for a number of years now. Recently the iPhone 12 came out. You did that little video with the workflow, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how our industry continues to push that and what new technologies develop out of that. Joel, or Matt, do you guys see any opportunities in this space we're talking about today with concrete where you guys might start to use that or find it useful? And I'm interested to hear that because it's going to be interesting to see how people look at it from a accuracy standpoint, because we already have those questions today using the augmented reality systems that are out there now. But a lot of people just want to do a visual check and say, check, it's there. And everybody seems to have iPads and iPhones in their hands. What's your guys' viewpoints on it?
With the HoloLens, I'm kind of skeptical because of the COVID situation, because of how everything else is being. Before COVID, before the pandemic, I think that's where everybody was going, where they can share the HoloLens, they can do this. Now you have to buy multiple HoloLens, multiple different ones for the whole project for each person, and it's a little bit more harder to come about.
Yeah.
I like the VR. It's a lot easier for, I think, a younger engineer to go around, but I think the more easier way of seeing things I've seen is showing someone in 2D to before 3D, and that's where it's like more eye-opening.
Okay.
For me.
That's interesting. We're always talking about 3D this, 3D that, but I'm hearing 2D come out of you. So that's an interesting.
I like to go, like I zoom in and I basically have 2Ds within my cuts of my 3D so that it can go right into my 3D. So I have cuts.
Okay. So, and where are you doing? What software are you doing that in?
I'm doing that in Revitso.
So
I actually have my 2D plans, my 3D 60 panoramics, and my point cloud and all in one. So then all they can see is a good demonstration of where everything is.
Okay. How are you finding, with a lot of the software and stuff that's out there, you're using a lot of different programs. How do you find, are they talking to each other? Are you finding it time consuming to go from one to the other?
It's kind of time consuming, but if you get it, I feel like if you get it into Recap, and another one that I like to use as well, besides Revitso, is Point Fuse, which is my meshing tool. That makes it, that's what I coordinate to, and it's Point Fuse is used, it basically can shrink a point cloud within 75% of the size, and with all the data inside of it. And it's very nice to use for MVP coordination. And it comes in, the one thing that's kind of challenging, like you said, it's basically trying to have that workflow where everybody is in that same coordinate realm, and it's always pull and take, basically trying to figure it out. If you work backwards or forwards, and if you're working, you finally figure out where everything is and where that true elevation is, or that true elevation point, everything kind of works together.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like a puzzle piece, basically.
Yeah.
It's a jigsaw trying to get it to go.
Right. Matt, I skipped over you earlier on the iPhone thing, so I want to hear
you're good.
Hear your opinion on it. When I get these thoughts that come to mind, I gotta spit them out before I forget about them.
That's how it goes. No problem. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I when I saw that there was quote LiDAR on the iPhone, I went out and got it and started playing with it, of course, because it's what we do.
Of course.
And to be honest, like before doing real in-depth comparisons of the data captured with the iPhone and then captured with a terrestrial scanner, the iPhone my initial thought was, holy crap. Like I was impressed as to what it was capturing. You know, and I think it's the first version, right?
Yeah.
It's the first time you're able to pull out the phone that's on me 24/7. You know, I don't have big equipment in my pocket randomly, you know. So the fact that it's there and it is starting down that road, to me, I think is pretty exciting and cool. You know, I honestly think it will get to the point that we will be able to use the phone for small measurements, and, you know, when it's not a high accuracy need. You know, we trialed it out on different data sets, and the biggest take back was it's not consistent right now. Like, if I measured a wall, if I measured the inside of our office twice, I'm not going to get the same dimensions both times. It may be give or take an inch or 2 or 3, or one wall may be perfect, the other wall may be drifting off, you know, so it's not consistent enough to like go buy an iPhone and go, you know, that's your scanner.
I'm an expert.
Yes. So, but the way I approach it, when I did my webinars, you know, it's just like all these other tools, right? A laser tracker, a laser scanner, different types of scanners, handheld scanners, backpack scanners. They're all a tool, and they all can do something specific. And so is the iPhone. It can do something that the terrestrial scanner can't do. It can fit in my pocket, you know, and I have it with me. So the fact that I could pull it out and get some like rough, I could scan a room and bring back some rough dimensions and an actual point cloud. To me, it's an impressive first step. I think it has a ways to go. But I think the biggest improvement side, honestly, for both terrestrial scanners and the iPhone and all of it is really, I think, on the software and processing side. Because even on the iPhone, there's several different apps, and they all do different things, and, you know, different accuracies and qualities coming out of it. So I think that there's going to be a lot that we see improving over the next, you know, even year or two. But the AR side, like you mentioned, Brent, I think is one of the first applications that I thought was pretty cool. I even used it about a month ago. I actually moved, and I have a 8 foot long dining table, and I went and I scanned the table, and even though it's, you know, within an inch or whatever, I virtually took that to the new empty house, and I pulled open the same app I showed on my webinar, and I could plop open my table right in the living room and orient it and see how far it would come out, and before ever moving it, and I could see if it was going to fit.
And that,
you know, so
that's exactly where I see this happening, and I think it's. You mentioned software is the important part, and I totally agree. We're going to come back to, okay, we have all this different sensory data, and the guys who can pull all that in and be able to read and work with it in one ecosystem, one solution, that's, you know, they're at the top of the podium right now, because they're making that challenge easy for their customer to address. And I think going forward, as these technologies continue to expand and we find use cases for them, that will be one of the focuses that we try to do is, how do we incorporate that? Everybody has an iPhone, right? How do you incorporate that into your workflow so that, hey, I can take that drawing that Joel produced from the floor flatness and I can, you know, augment it on my phone. That's going to give me that rough, right, maybe 1 to 2 feet or 1 to 2 inches. And then if I want to take it further, then, okay, I can go to a total station, or I can go to a laser projector or something that has more accuracy to be able to do that. And that's exciting. That's cool.
Yeah, and I think that's the initial thought behind, you know, the reason there's a LiDAR sensor in the iPhone. They didn't put it in there for AEC professionals to go scan buildings. Like, that wasn't their first reason.
Hey, like, hey, Sarah, we're coming after you, right?
I mean, their first reason is the AR side. They're using the LiDAR to be able to measure the area to then be able to place items. So one of the things I think we'll be seeing a lot more of is, and it's already happening. You know, furniture stores.
Yep.
You're gonna go on Amazon to order a new chair or something, or a couch or a table or anything, and you're just gonna scroll through your list, pick one, see how it fits, see if you like the color, swap around, and really start to
just
incorporate
don't be too
the physical
reliant
and digital
on the fact if it's going to fit through the door or not. Right.
Exactly.
I don't want to see any contractors out there using the iPhone to see if you're going to fit underneath that transmission line with that crane, right? That's not what we're talking about here.
And that's where, you know, it's said a lot, and I think it's just the perfect saying, right? The right tool for the job. Like, I also wouldn't buy a $50,000 laser scanner to go measure my 8-foot table to see if it's going to fit. I would just rather physically move it and see that it doesn't, you know, but if I have the iPhone, then I'm going to do it that, you know, so it really comes down to what's your industry, what's your project type, you know, what's the accuracy you need, where do you need the data to get to, you know, all of those things then play into, do I rent gear? Do I buy gear? Do I use somebody? You know, you have to really formulate all of those questions before you know how to take your next step forward.
Right. No, absolutely. Joel, one of the things I was going to ask you, and perhaps it's a wrap-up question, but I don't want to forget it, so I'm going to ask it now. You know, with everything you guys are doing today and all the software you're working in to create those plans and check and verify those things, what do you see the industry needs to make your job easier or to address these challenges? You know, you say, I frequently hear from a lot of contractors, I don't have enough time to go do those scans. Some of them kind of build that in. They have dedicated people, right? I know some projects we've talked about you've done dedicated scanning for, but what are some of those things that you would like to see or that you guys need to make your reality capture life easier? And reality capture, remember, we're talking about scanners, we're talking about drones and photography. It all kind of goes together.
I would say we need time, and it seems like we need more dedicated people, and that sometimes we just don't have it at this time, or we don't have that in our budget, which it kind of lacks. Because like when you have one person trying to do, say, 51 stories or trying to do 360 photos for that day, that's going to be a one day, one person, 8 hours. And there's probably more important things that they need from a project manager standpoint.
Sure.
And I see another thing is like the pre-pours. I would love to be where we have it, and this comes into the time management, like the pre-pour. I would like to be able to scan or get something in there and then be like, right before we pour, hey, we have a problem here, 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 and here. This needs to be shifted. Yeah. Right now we're scanning while they're pouring.
Right.
And you can't even get it to register. You're registering right after, probably the next day after it's already been poured. And then you already know what the errors are, or you're catching errors that people need to add to the floor later on as more of an as-built kind of location.
Right.
So more or less, I'm going to agree with everybody else that I need time to get something. That time is like the more efficient, or I think it's something that needs to be more evolved, where it's going to cost more to the project, but you need more people, or someone that is dedicated to take those pictures, or somewhere we have time for someone to do that.
Okay. So that leads me to ask you then, because with time being one of the most important factors and one of the things that we, from a physical standpoint, we can't add, right? Time is time. It is what it is. What has been your guys' viewpoint as more autonomous solutions have come about, right? Spot and Matt, help me with some of the other ones, Dusty Robotics and Doxel and solutions like that, the ScanBot. What has been your guys' opinion on that? Because some folks we talk to, they worry that, Spot's taking my job. No. He's actually doing the opposite. He's allowing Joel to be more productive while he does a task. What has been Clark Construction's viewpoint on that? Is that something you guys have looked at to try and address that?
We have looked at it. We like that. We would like to get into robotics. We just haven't had the right project in the right frame of mind to get that done.
Okay.
Especially we are very looking into trying to get more robotic, more fabrication, at where our self-performing is in California and out east, where we have that. The robotic would be really nice. One thing is, it depends on what contract we have and how the cost of it as well.
Yeah.
Of how that cost is always going to be the number one underlying issue.
Sure.
Is the cost.
Yep.
When there's a limited spots or limited this, it's going to be pretty hefty price. And is it the value that the owner wants?
Yeah.
Like do they need the 360? Do they want the or they want the virtual walk?
Mm-hmm.
Now, per se, when we have all these developers that are cross country that are developing in Chicago or in this region, it's a very nice tool. Now you don't, with this COVID situation with the traveling, that you have a virtual walking tour where we have these different platforms that we can use that can take these pictures robotically, that you can have someone come in and stop and do that.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting and
so you could actually have like a live meeting, right? You could say, hey, Spot,
Exactly.
Get up, turn on my 360 camera, and I'm walking around, and you scan the day prior, and you're having those meetings. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, we're we're in the beginning stages of trying to figure out what is the best way of developing our workflow and our personnel to what do we hire out to robotics, or what do we do to make that happen. Hiring a third party. I mean, like where we have started with Coda, that Coda does that for us at Clark as our third party that does scanning as well, or 3D supplementation for some jobs.
Okay.
But, I mean, it depends on our it just depends on the cost most importantly of what we have in the manpower.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to me, I think that it's definitely the future. I think that Spot is, that type of scenario of it takes away the person and the training and the time frame and all that. I think it's definitely going to be there. Thus far, I personally haven't had enough hands-on. Like I look at it like virtual, autonomous cars, right? Like, oh man, I can see the future of I can just sit in the car. I don't think it's like it's not what's on the road yet. I think there's all those hindrances of, okay, the safety side, the job set side. What happens if the robotics, take the leap or...
And I don't think you'll ever get away from that, because it's technology, right? And we're developing it. It's not a human being, unless it had AI where it can learn and understand those things. I think you'll always have some of those physical limitations while those get smaller and smaller and smaller. You're just going to have to ensure that that's the right tool for the job. If you're going to have a job where you're using Spot to do concrete scanning, but you're like, oh, well, that means I don't have to leave the safety net up once that's done, whereas you normally would, because you normally have human beings up there. Well, that's probably not going to work, because Spot may just walk off, right? So you're still going to have to consider, it for the right project. But I think we're at a point in today's technological world that we have solutions that can help address some of the challenges that you mentioned, Joel, and other challenges that are out there today with, confined space and things like that. But being able to help address the time, it's there. Now I see it being challenging too. Obviously with pre-pour and having a deck that has pre-tension cabling and stuff adds another challenge to that. Or if you're doing pouring, Spot doesn't know if it's wet or dry. He might just walk right in there and leave his footprints in the concrete, right? So there's those challenges too.
Yeah.
But
I definitely see it getting to the point, though, that it's like the robot vacuums at home, where it could understand the floor plan.
Yeah.
It could have the sensors in place that we could go in a PDF on the computer and outline and say, here's the exact floor plan, here's the exact path you're going to follow. And it, on a daily basis, you don't have to touch it. It's already charging, just like the vacuum. And it gets up, does its one path, captures it, Wi-Fi's the data. I definitely see that happening. And yes, I think there will still be some limitations, but I think that portion right there is very doable at some point.
Yeah, no, I agree. And unlike a Roomba, you don't have to worry about if your dog's at home and it left something there for it to clean up, right? Because we've all seen the video. We know what happens there. But Spot has those sensors on it so that it can, something's in its way, it can move around it and address that. So no, that's interesting to know, and I think earlier you mentioned, with the addition of Coda to Clark Construction, there's a number of contractors and companies that have third party or sister companies. Was that added as to help address some of those challenges with what you're facing?
Yes, it's trying to help those challenges. It's try to help the owner see what those challenges are, help with new technologies, help with developing different codes that we can put into Revit for drawings that we have, that we can figure out some codes or challenges that we have there, to laser scanning that we have before the job that we don't even have the job yet, kind of thing to help with, and other things that, Clark as a GC can't provide. That's outside their kind of realm of responsibilities that we are trying to work with, trying to help negate basically.
Okay.
Which is helping.
Okay. That's cool. Oh, Matt, awesome. I'm trying to think of some other questions I want to ask. Don't worry, Joel. We're going to cut this portion out. So.
No, that's all good. I know we talked a lot about the active construction, the concrete.
Yep.
What about the the as-built side? I know scanning for as-builts into Revit, that's kind of a big item for a lot of industries.
Yes.
Are you guys doing quite a bit of that, where you'll actually take the point clouds and remodel the existing conditions?
Yes, I did that. We did that out east for another project, Noman Coal. It was a water treatment plant for three buildings. We found out that the plans and the point clouds don't match together, and we found out that we had to scan to BIM to coordinate to that. So it basically saved a lot of problems and a lot of headache to these renovations. That was like water treatment plant that was not a traditional architectural residential job. That was probably saved a lot of where that wall was to existing beams, to existing grading, to where we needed to be with that wall or steel to install fabrication pipe that they're fabricating in the field. One other thing to that is, we're at Willis Tower at the Skydeck, and we didn't really need to do the scan to BIM. We used a mesh from Point Fuse, and that worked perfectly fine to coordinate to with a light size file, that we didn't have to go to that level of effort to get there, where it was a shorter amount of time, where instead of having that 1 month turnaround for 2 to 3 floors, it was a 4 to 5 day turnaround, and you're already ready to coordinate with your MEP subs that need to get done with that renovation work for our Skydeck.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think we've seen over the last couple of years, I think a really rampant increase in the amount of people really realizing the value in scanning for existing conditions, and usually we do see it going to that model, for the benefits that the model itself gives, right? Like the drawing production out, being able to split out your floor plans after your model's done, or being able to turn your different trades on and off. I definitely am excited to see more about the meshing side. I've seen Point Fuse, haven't hands-on used it, but obviously there's those projects where you don't need that full model build out, and that's one of those. One of those, I think, biggest struggles as well, is creating things from the data. It's specialized, it's slow, it's the software. Yep. There's a lack of people to do it. So that's one of those areas we see a lot of need in too.
Yeah. So there's another interesting thing is like we did another project out east at 555 that is interesting, that how we do our site check that we did inside. We actually did a scan of a whole building that was going to be renovated, and we did heat maps inside the map so they know what their surface floor deviation were to the point cloud inside. So they had every single floor heat matted, and then we modeled the structural, architectural, and the existing MEPs. So it was very interesting how our scan team did that out east.
Do you do you ever come into an existing building that the existing drawings were good enough to use?
Oh, come on.
Yeah, like that. I think it's been a mixed bag. It's really been where it's been a luxury, because sometimes I never had to get the scan or this. I've been on a few jobs where it was a stadium project where we didn't have time to use the scanning, and we were going off PDFs. We really didn't model anything. They were just coordinating to the field and trying to attach pipe. And I think that made us lose time to install instead of gaining time.
And that's one of those scenarios that you think about that and you're like, oh, we don't have time to scan, but you're like, wait, what happens if we don't?
Yeah. So we were coordinating off sections of 2D PDFs, not even using 3D, and because we didn't have even an architectural model, and we were just trying to work off of what that was, and it was a little cumbersome because we were like, okay, we'll push this to another phase instead of trying to attack the problem at hand in some areas. So
are you guys on your existing projects? I've been on some that you guys have done. Are you doing a lot of existing building renovations, and when you get those projects with regards to the floors, right? Are you guys assuming the floors are good? Are you going in and you scanning those and then doing your similar workflow as if you guys were, the GC on a project and subbing out the concrete? What happens on those projects?
We don't do typically a lot of renovations. Our first renovation was Willis Tower that I've been on with Clark for the 4 years I've been here. We particularly wanted to get it. We did scan it. We knew the floors were going to be. We knew the floors on one of the floors that it was going to be cut out, but they knew how much it was going to be, and they had to demo it, cut it. But I scanned it, so if we had to come back to it, we had a chance to. But we kept that to our concrete sub to make sure that got to that elevation.
Okay.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, because you can a number of existing buildings, whether it's a warehouse or a vertical high-rise or anything, right? Especially if it's old, you're going to have spalding concrete and things like that. So it's always interesting to see how contractors bid out the repair work. If they're doing it themselves, are they scanning it? You have ADA compliance to take into account. There's so many different things that have to be considered for that, and it's always interesting to see the ways that companies do it.
So a lot of our substations here in Chicago have a really stiduance on concrete, and we've had some of those where I had to scan that and kind of show how flat that concrete is. And that turned out very well to know where are areas that we needed to maybe chisel or add more concrete to make sure that piece of equipment or a panel that needed to be there to catch those errors before you're like, oh crap, that piece of equipment just not level.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh no, and they figure that out before we even get that thing shipped out. So that's been very nice too. Those have been really small renovations. Those are kind of substations to our local train yard and everything else. But yeah, those have been very nice. Nice little map that can show where those locations were.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's awesome. Awesome. Oh, good stuff. But I have to go back to the stadium question though now again, because this is, I like to hear that. So from your perspective, on a project where, you know, client driven or construction schedule driven, you weren't able to scan up front, and you went on using existing drawings. But after the fact, you'd say if it would have been better to push back in the beginning and scan and use that data than the headaches that came from not doing so.
Absolutely. And, you know, a stadium's not square. So now you have to think of pipes that are trying to wrap around a circle. So now you have to figure out where those couplings are and where everything's going to be and how much rotation you have. And then
that's just...
So, like...
Is this the one I think we're talking about? Is this the stadium I think we're talking about?
No comment.
Yeah, no comment. We'll keep it to high level.
But those are some... That's past before Clark, but that's something where, you know, I feel like in those years that I feel like a lot of people didn't know scanners at that time, or didn't have the knowledge of knowing how fast a turnaround it could be, or didn't know how, you know, we weren't smart enough per se in that kind of technology at that time.
And to be honest, I think, and why I wanted to go back to that conversation again, is I think that is still the scenario that we see a ton even today. You know, you get in conversations, you talk about the way it could be used, but people are like, no, this is the, you know, oh, I don't want to spend that up front. And that's one of the things about scanning too, right, is it is an upfront cost. And a lot of times it's like, oh, we don't want to spend that. But you have to kind of look at a project like this where you're like, if we would have, even though we don't know 100% of the time what the ROI is going to be, these are the things that it would have saved. So sometimes it's hard to sell that and convince up front, yet at the same time, so many projects move forward without doing it. And by the time they get to the end, they're like, yeah, it definitely would have helped. But then you get to the next job, and sometimes it's the same scenario. Yeah. You're like, you ran into this last time, you know, scan in the beginning. Okay, how much is it going to cost? You know, it's this cycle.
What was it like? So, like, on this water treatment that we just kind of finished up there, when I was doing the MEP coordination, and we got point clouds from a third party, and we kind of looked at it and looked at the contracts, and we could find that differentiations of different things that, I mean, you know, they went off the as-builts, which you should draw off the as-builts. And, like, there were still some, you know, things that you don't see from what you catch from the as-builts. It was so powerful to get the MEP buy-in, because now that they have the dimensions to what the field team is drawing out there to the end, it makes it such an easier conversation that we're all reading off the same plans or reading off the same dimensions. And it's a back check to the contract drawings. It's just a back check, which is unbelievable.
Oh, it's amazing too with projects where you have prefab happening, right? A lot of times we assume too much in our industry. You know, in this situation, we assume the as-builts were correct, right? In other projects, we assume those are correct. We assume that the pipes that, you know, were installed 30 years ago on this waste treatment plant are where they're supposed to. They didn't settle, right? And then, you know, we develop these designs, and then we send them to the fabrication shop, and they fab up these pipes, or they make these concrete walls. But then there's no as-built check there, and then it gets to the field and it doesn't fit. So I think it's important to bring that up too, because, you know, you may have a perfect site, or there's something you miss and not catch, and then you go in and you start to have these things built or prefabricated, then those don't get checked and they get out the site and they're not perfect. It's kind of, you know, that scenario I've seen on the industrial side, where you have ducting systems being put on, you know, large industrial systems, and you out and you field as-built it, you measure it, and then you develop your CAD off of that, and then you take it back to the shop, you fabricate it, but you don't check your work, and then you ship it to site, and then it's wrong, right?
Yeah.
So I I would love to see our industry take more action on that. There's some big scanning contractors out there now that do prefab where they scan all their work before it goes out. And I think that's a tremendous value add. I think it follows in line with our contractors that are doing this concrete work, right? That heat map is their sign off, their stamp. Just like if I'm a surveyor and I'm doing an Alta, when I put my name on it, that's my handoff. So that floor survey, it's the same thing. Those prefabricated panels or those piping systems, it's the same sign off that they're doing. And I think we need to be scanning more and more and more. And with you know, I think one of the comments you always get with that, Joel, you mentioned earlier, it's people, it's shortages, right? And I hear it a lot, because when people think about adding scanners to their arsenal, they think, oh, now I got to hire somebody to do it. And that may not necessarily always be the case, right? There are certain circumstances that, you're going to have to hire someone, or somebody within the organization is going to have to take on that task. But as soon as you show them that value add, that one flaw that costs $10,000, $20,000 to fix, it almost becomes priceless for it. At that point.
Yeah, and that's why you know, a lot of times people we obviously talk with a lot of people. We research a lot in the technology, and people will ask me, what do I see as the next, you know, step? And I'm like, honestly, I'm not even worried about the next step yet. My initial focus is like, let's just do what already exists better and more.
We're here. Let's just make it better.
More. We need more people trained. We need more people to understand that full process of why do we benefit from scanning up front? How can we do it efficiently? Where are the hiccups in the processing? Getting it on control. How do we then get it into validation and drawings? How do we then have the fab shop? You know, if we just integrate what already exists into those processes better, that's where I see I would say only 15% of the market is even doing what they should be doing with what exists today, to be honest. I think there's so much room for improvement.
Right? That's just here. Imagine other regions around the world, right? It's probably the same or less depending on where you're at. You know, one of the other things we didn't talk about was, you know, we've talked about in other episodes, I think, Matt, and other conversations, but standardization, right? In scanning of really anything, right, with BIM, but more specifically with what we're talking about today with concrete, right? There's there's ASTM standards, there's different standards to follow depending on where you're building at and things like that, but the way in which we capture that data differs from firm to firm, even sometimes vendor to vendor. Our workflows are a little different. Do you find, Joel, within your organization that you guys are pretty consistent with your scanning standards? Do those vary? Do you see that as an issue in the industry?
Right now, we are trying to develop our standards a little bit. I always think it can be better on every single project. What can I learn and what can we do better on the next one? Or how can I present my data that there is no questions with my data, that it's concrete and they understand it and it's done. Right. That's like kind of how I want. Other things, like right now we have that heat map and where we're getting to. One thing I'd like to get into, like a lot of my superintendents are like, you know, this shows me my flatness, but what is my levelness? How can we show levelness? How can we show that? I mean, we're trying to figure out what is the right report and how we can show how concrete can be showed level in a scan. You know how everybody does it the traditional way. They just do those long strings and says,
your typical FFL, right? You got a line that's 11 foot long or longer. You put in your FL number, you put in your FF number, and then it tells you if it passes or fails, and it gives you a graph. But now we want to interpolate that data visually, right? That's what you're saying. Those guys want a way to visually interpolate that data, that flatness.
exactly, into a nice report. Instead of trying to see just one line, let's see all these multiple lines all crossed and seeing what they can attribute with that levelness.
Now, do you think they want, like, look at the different ways we can do things today, right? So we could create reports in CAD and have all those lines on there or all those graphs, right, on a sheet of paper. But what if you can put it on the actual floor, right? So getting back to the idea of augmented reality and visual templating, right? So what if I could take that FFL line and put it on the floor and show that curve, that line graph, right? Is that what you think they're going after, or is it
Yeah, they're
something
looking
else?
for like what you're trying to go after, something better to have a better visual interpretation of the floor.
Okay.
And I think that's a really cool idea. With our kind of projects, and I don't know if that could work with the projector, but I would like to figure out a way where you have say a model or something like that, and you have a line, and you can just drag that line across the line, and then you can just see on the other side where it has a line graph that shows where that one line is, and it just basically, you can just push it back and forth across the floor, and knowing where how that floor interpretates would be pretty powerful.
I think that's one of the things in the industry that is where we need to spend more time. Is we figure out how to scan, we can make those workflows faster. We've figured out how to extract the quality, the QA/QC analysis of the floor, whether it's a heat map or an FFFL report or just a grid of points. But now, how do we make it more interactive, right? And part of that process is also making it fast, right? Okay, I can make it more interactive, but I have to have a HoloLens, I have to have someone smart who knows how to put that data in there, and then I have to teach the superintendent who may not be experienced with it, or maybe he's a different generation, he doesn't want to deal with that technology. So those are the things I think we have to overcome next, is that generation gap. Some are open to using that technology, some are like, nope, I'm retiring in 3 years, I don't want to touch that damn thing, just give me that sheet of paper. And then we also have to look at how what's that industry standard, what are we going to define as that's how you do floor analysis and that's how you do floor corrections today, because it differs so much. So start asking your folks that. How do they want to see their deliverables now, right? I remember doing crane surveys in the mills, and I'd have these ideas. Oh, let's put a heat map on this, or let's make this 3D report and show everything going down. No, I just want the 2D line graph. Just show the elevations on there. I just want the line graph. That's how they want it, and you just didn't change it. And sometimes that's the case, but we have to keep asking those questions and showing these things that we develop to see if it does make a difference, right? Does it make a difference in time? Does it make a difference in cost, right? Because floor corrections or any type of concrete correction you have to make, it's a huge cost to a project. So
love it. All right,
great
guys.
stuff.
I know think we're at about time. It's been a fun conversation today, though.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, Matt, appreciate it. Joel, appreciate your insights and working with you over these years, and keep doing your thing and keep asking those questions, and we'll keep listening and see what we can come up with next. So.
All right.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Yeah, Brent, Joel, I appreciate both of you, the conversation, and it won't be the last time, I'm sure. We'll see you around.
No, hopefully we can see each other in person this year.
I know, that'd be great.
Definitely.
All right, guys. Thanks, Matt.
All right,
we'll
guys.
talk to you soon.
Have a good one.
Have a good one. Bye.
Reality Capture Network, bringing the future to you.